The final piece we'll dig into is the Azure AD Application Proxy. Now, as you've looked at Azure Active Directory, there's a lot of capability there that you can use to govern access to web-based applications. Well, what if you have an application that's in your own data center that's a web-based application that you want to leverage these capabilities of Azure Active Directory when you're implementing authentication for it? So you don't want to have to build for this application a standalone multi-factor authentication provider. You don't want to have to build its own roles. You want to use all that stuff from Azure Active Directory. Well, traditionally, the only way you would do that is to create a federation relationship, which is a fairly difficult process. With Azure AD Premium, we now have the notion of what's called an application proxy and an application proxy connector. And so this is a piece of software that you install in your data center that acts as an intermediary between the web-based application that is not Azure AD integrated and Azure AD to extend some of those capabilities to that regular web app that's in your data center. So in the example, a little workflow that we've got here on the slide, a user logs onto Azure AD and gets authenticated. That authentication request is then sent through the application proxy to validate that user in Windows Server Active Directory in the data center. Once they're validated, it allows the user to access the web app, and the application proxy acts as a proxy for that connection. So only users that are approved within Azure AD will be allowed through the proxy and therefore enabled to access that application. So it's a very powerful tool that essentially allows you to take the authentication mechanism of Azure Active Directory and extend it and lay it essentially on top of any web application that is not Azure Active Directory enabled. So it's not a full integration, it's a gateway between it that ensures that all those capabilities that you've invested in with Azure AD can now extend to those applications that are not aware of Azure Active Directory. So just some notes on this. Requires an on-premises piece of software in your data center that uses port 80, port 443. Requires a subscription with Azure Active Directory, a global admin role, and then at least Windows Server 2012 R2 or higher on that on-premises connector. And it's very commonly used for access to govern access to internal non-Azure Active Directory enabled SharePoint sites, Outlook Web Access, traditional IIS applications, or even applications behind a remote desktop gateway, such as applications hosted on remote apps. So a bunch of different use cases for this that enable Azure AD authentication controls to govern access to non-Azure AD aware applications.